Have you ever had big plans for a project but it just seemed to keep going wrong? That's what happened with these two huge nightstands. I thought this was going to be a super easy flip. It wasn't. Everything kept going wrong. Join me for the next 20 minutes and I'll show you what happened. My name is Angie and I'm the one behind Transcend Furniture Gallery, a business created from the love of vintage furniture and the desire to take broken, dated, and unloved things and turn them into modern treasures. Sometimes I paint, and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. So it's quite obvious here that the top of this is absolutely shot. I knew that there was water damage. The lady did mention it in the ad, but the pictures in the ad weren't fantastic, and she did say that these were solid wood. It was very difficult to tell from the photos that she had. These are not 100% solid wood, and I will show you why shortly. I'm just assessing the current paint job here. I need to determine if I'm going to be able to paint over this. One of the main reasons I don't paint over previously painted pieces is because I have no idea what kind of paint they used and if it was applied properly, so I'm going to do a little test here in a moment. I'm starting as usual by pulling the drawers out. This drawer did not want to come out, and there's actually a little hook underneath here, a little plastic piece. You just push that down to release the drawer. Hardware is next. I don't mind this hardware, so I am going to be reusing it. I'm probably going to repaint it. I'm not sure what color yet. It'll sort of come to me as the piece comes together. The drawers themselves are in great shape. They are a little dingy though, and I'm going to give this a light scuff sand and seal it with some sort of coating at the end just to give it a refresh. It's clear that they have spray painted this hardware sort of a glossy black. I'm going to have to make sure that that is also intact before I repaint those. And just giving a little bit of a scratch test here. Obviously, if I press hard enough, I'm going to scrape it. I'm just trying to determine if this is going to scratch with normal wear and tear, and it seems pretty good, but I don't know what they have sealed this with. It could be wax, it could be some other coating. I'm using some mineral spirits to clean it up. Mineral spirits will help dissolve any wax coatings that's there, as well as just sort of give this piece a clean before I'm ready to paint. Alright, good grief, let's get into this top. So, as I mentioned, the ad stated that this was a solid wood piece. I was fairly certain it wasn't, just because of the nature of the bubbling here. Solid wood doesn't bubble like that. So I'm looking at the back here, you can see that there's a solid wood frame, but the top is actually a piece of veneer. So what that immediately tells me is that this bubbling is caused by pressed wood underneath the laminate, and I'm replacing these tops completely, so I'm just taking a chunk out here so I can show you what I'm talking about. So this outer edge all the way around is solid wood, so from the edge of this scraper over is solid wood, and everything else in between is pressed wood covered by that thin strip of veneer. So what happened is clearly some sort of moisture got into that pressed wood layer and everything just bubbled up. Just removing the screws from the underside, I'm fairly certain part of this is going to be glued down, and there's probably little staples in here as well, which you can see here. Unfortunately, when I pulled this up, I did tear a little bit of the wood frame. Definitely not my intention, but it sometimes happens when you're dealing with things that have been glued down. They just don't always want to release. I'm prying this off, I'm going to clean it up, and I'm going to glue it back in place and clamp it down to dry. So the broken piece of wood was obviously an inconvenience. Here's where things really take a turn. At this point, I already know the sander is doomed. I can smell burning components, and poor Mr. DeWalt's motor is done. My 2-year friendship is over. Fortunately, I did have a spare sander. It is missing a pad, so I'm going to have to steal it from the other one. They're both DeWalt's. They're quite similar in power, but one of them actually has speed control, which is actually quite nice. This is the pad I'm going to grab from my old sander and pop onto the new one, or my other one rather. It's not actually brand new. This is usually the first thing that goes on a sander. It's not typically the motor. You can pick up replacements at most hardware stores, or Amazon is where I usually get mine. They're actually pretty easy to replace. You just remove the screws and line up the holes and re-add the screws, making sure they're nice and tight, and you're good to go. People ask me all the time how I hook up my sander to my shop vac, and there is attachments you can buy, like little adapters. I don't have one. This works for me. I just sort of wrap it in electrical tape to make it a little bit snug, and then I just wrap it again around the outside to hold it firm, and that works just fine for me. Alright, I think we're back in business. I haven't used this sander in a couple of years, so I'm just going to give it a quick test. Alright, so the first big crisis averted. If I hadn't had a spare sander, that could have been really bad for me. I'm just slightly roughing up the surface, making sure everything's nice and smooth for my first coat of paint. I'm wanting this piece to stay quite light, so I've picked a really pretty warm neutral color by Fusion Mineral Paint for the drawer fronts and the bottom of the cabinet. The tops, like I mentioned, I'm going to be replacing, and the tops are actually going to be a nice light, almost raw wood color, so I think this would look nice together. But you will see shortly how that assumption also came back to haunt me. At this point in time, I'm loving how this color looks. It just feels a bit richer than that sort of stark bright white. While my first coat of paint is drying, I'm going to move on to getting the tops ready. I'm just making sure this is nice and smooth, and these are the laminated pine panels that I'm using. It is solid wood, even though it says laminated. There are a few sort of marks and holes I'm going to have to fill, including a few that actually have sap in them, so I'm going to have to remove any sap before I do any filling, obviously. I'm scraping out as much of the sap as I possibly can, and then I'm going to be filling these gaps with a natural colored wood filler. So these project panels aren't quite deep enough for the depth, like front to back of this piece, so I'm actually going to have to cut a strip from the third piece. I bought 3 pieces, one for each top, and then a third one so I can cut strips, if this makes sense. So I can add a piece to the back. So I'm just measuring how wide I want these pieces first of all, from side to side. And I also have a measurement for that gap at the back, so that's what I'm measuring here, and I'll cut those first. These strips and panels that are currently sitting on the tops, these are going to have to be glued together, which will form one big solid top. I actually have my thumb against the left side of this circular saw, and it's just guiding it along, which gives me a nice smooth straight cut. And here's a better view of that from the other side. Because I have to glue these raw wood pieces together, I'm adding some painter's tape on here to both edges where the wood is going to meet. And what this is going to do, it's going to keep any glue that spills out from the joint from staining the wood. Wood glue is horrible for staining woods, especially pine, so this is just going to help with that. One thing to consider when you're gluing more than one piece of wood together is that they might not always be flush with each other. So what I'm doing is I'm taping the bottom of these two little scrap pieces of wood, and I'm going to clamp them perpendicular to the boards I'm gluing. And what that'll do is it'll help keep them level, if that makes sense. So I'm doing the glue up here, running a bead along the spare piece and again on the big piece, gluing those together. My phone didn't record the second part, so you have to just take my word for it that I glued it. This is the next morning. You can see there is a bit of sap that has pushed itself out. Hopefully that is the last of it. It didn't come up through the surface, it pushed out the side where the crack was. Because I'm not a woodworker and I don't very often deal with raw wood like this, I'm not super familiar with how to deal with sap other than to just remove it. If this is something you've dealt with and you have a good tip, feel free to leave it in the comments below. And I'm just pulling the tape off here, and now I can get to work. Removing this last bit of sap here, and now I'm ready to cut these widthwise. So if you remember, I measured yesterday the exact width I want these nightstand tops to be, and I'm just cutting them down here. These are looking pretty good. I'm going to give them a first sanding here before I glue them down and attach them. Starting out with a 150 grit, there are quite a few ridges, and obviously I have to remove these little bits of filler, so 150 is going to cut through that pretty well. And of course, not forgetting the sides, especially the sides that were cut, getting those nice and smooth. Now, I don't want these tops to be perfectly rectangular. As you can see, the base here has a bit of a curve. So what I did is I just used this used up sanding pad to trace out my circle, and I'm going to cut that with a jigsaw, sand it smooth, and then I'll have a nice rounded edge to mirror the front. This is going to be my sort of final sanding before I do the wax, and I'm just going over the edges here. I don't want a hard corner, I want it to be nice and round and soft, so I'm just kind of going along the edge here, just smoothing that out a bit. It's time to tackle this hardware. I'm using my favorite flat black spray paint to take these from glossy black to more of a flat black. I love this stuff, I find it very durable, it's easy to spray. Test spray there, and then I'm going to be doing 2 very light coats on each side. And when you're doing pulls like this, always start by spraying the back side first. I know it's tempting to spray the front first, but trust me, start with the back, and then when you flip it over, if there's any imperfections, it's going to be hidden in behind rather than right in front where everyone can see it. So you can see here, the one on the left is the flat black, the one on the right is the glossy black. I like the flat black a little bit better, it's just a little bit more modern looking. I'm spraying the fronts now of these and going to let them dry for a few hours. And while this is happening, I'm going to move on to waxing the tops of the nightstands. You've seen me use this product a couple of times now in other videos. It's one of my favorite white waxes. It's super easy to use, it's very liquidy. It's going to give this piece a bit of a pale look, and what I didn't anticipate was that it would end up looking a little bit more yellow than I had expected. Normally I use this on birch or maple. I don't use it on pine very often, and I didn't love the look. I don't know, the color of the paint just didn't really jive that well with the top. I mean, it was fine, some people would like it, but while I was going for that sort of raw, unfinished wood look, I just didn't like the color. So what I did is I used 2 other custom colors just as samples here. You can see the one on the right is a very pale, almost minty green, and then the one on the left here is more of a sage green, and both are custom. 7 parts raw silk and 3 parts Inglenook is the recipe for this color that I ended up picking. I know looks a little scary here. It's going on super minty green, but it always goes on a little bit brighter than it actually dries. I am not stoked to be repainting this piece. I've already done 3 coats of that neutral color, but you can see here when you compare it to this sort of minty green, that first color is very almost pinky, and it just didn't look right with the tops that I found were a little bit too yellowish. So I'm happy now with the paint color, but I have to do something about this sort of yellow tone on top. So I'm using liming wax, which is a fusion product, and it's just gonna give me a bit more of a white tint to this top. And I think finally I'm on the right path. I like this so much better. So the left side here has the liming wax, the right side is just the white wax, and you can see there is a bit of a difference. And Andrea is here now to help me pick out the sealant for the drawers. We're doing a smell test. Big Mama's butter for the win. Okay, that was way too much fun. This stuff is so great. It nourishes the wood, it smells delicious, and basically you just wipe it on and wipe off any excess. It's that easy. So I'm finally about to wrap this up. I'm just reattaching the hardware. This has been a roller coaster, from my sander breaking to having to repaint the piece, redo the tops, but they are gorgeous and I'm so excited to show you. As always, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to give me a thumbs up if you like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more like this.